It's not easy sometimes getting up in front of people, and he always does it with a smile. We're going to be in Daniel a little bit in chapter 1, mostly in chapter 3 this morning. Daniel chapter 3. Man goes to his doctor one day. He says, "Doc, my family's been all over me." They say, "I can't hear them." And what do I need to do? The doctor gave him a couple of hearing aids, said, "Try these out, call me in a couple of weeks, tell me what happens." So a couple of weeks later, the guy comes back from his doctor. He said, "Man, these things are working great." He said, "Well, is your family happy?" He said, "I haven't told them yet. I just sit around listening, but I've changed my will 4 times." Daniel is one of those books that generally when you're a kid, it's your favorite. It's got all the major stories. Often we don't really see some of the lessons that are buried down inside of it. Plus the fact that Daniel has been one of the most prolific prophets who announced the coming of the Messiah. But in 605 BC, Nebuchadnezzar became king of Babylonia. And then he conquered Judah. And when he conquered Judah, he took the best of their young men and women, and he brought them into Babylon and put most of the men at work in his court. And this book introduces us to 4 young men: Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. All 4 of these young men are descendants of King Hezekiah, so they're all of royal bloodline. But when they got to Babylon, the king did not like the fact that they had names that praise God, because Nebuchadnezzar had a very particular vision that we'll talk about here in just a little bit. But the name Daniel means God is my judge. His name was changed to Belteshazzar, which means Bel, protect his life. Bel, or Marduk, was the chief Babylonian god. Then Hananiah, which means the Lord shows grace, was changed to Shadrach, under the command of Aku. And Aku was the Babylonian moon god. Mishael means who is like God. It was changed to Meshach, which is who is like Aku, again the moon god. And Azariah means the Lord helps, but that was changed to Abednego, or servant of Nabu. Nabu is the Babylonian god of wisdom, writing, and vegetation. I don't know why those all come together, but he was the son of Bel or Marduk, the main Babylonian god. Now, the first chapter of Daniel, when we're first introduced to these young men, starting from verse 8 in chapter 1 to verse 21, they are brought into the king's court. And a man named Ashpenaz, who is the chief eunuch, is put over their care. And he wants to feed them the way that the Babylonians eat. But the young men said, "Wait, we can't eat that food. If we eat that food, it will defile us. It is religiously unclean for us to eat that food." So Daniel makes a deal with him. He says, "Give us 10 days eating vegetables and drinking water, and then come back and take a look at us." And after 10 days, there's a noticeable difference. Eventually, Nebuchadnezzar meets with these young men. It says in Daniel chapter 1, verse 20, "As for every matter of expertise and understanding about which the king consulted them, he found them 10 times better than all the soothsayer priests and conjurers who were in his realm." So all of his wise men. He's saying these 4 young men are exceptional. They are 10 times better than any other wise men that we have. But then we move into chapter 3, and this is where things start to get interesting, at least for Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Now notice, we call Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego by their Babylonian names, yet we still call Daniel by his Hebrew name. Nobody has ever explained why that is. It was written that way, but nobody ever gave any further explanation from that. But Daniel chapter 3, verses 1 and 2 So Nebuchadnezzar the king made a statue of gold, the height of which was 60 cubits and its width 6 cubits. He set it up on the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon. Nebuchadnezzar the king also sent word to assemble the satraps, the prefects, and the governors, the counselors, the chief treasurers, the judges, the magistrates, and all the administrators of the provinces to come to the dedication of the statue that Nebuchadnezzar the king had set up. So he lists a group of officials who are going to be there. In the midst of this story, this group is going to come up several times. There's a reason for that we'll get into a little bit later. But what they call satraps would be what we would call senators or even federal governors. The prefects are his military commanders. The governors are civil administrators. These are at the level of a state governor. The counselors are lawyers or legal aides or advisors. The treasurers, obviously, are secretary of the treasury, state treasurers, or budget directors. The justices are your judges, your attorney generals. The magistrates are the officers that enforce judicial decisions, which would be your police chief, sheriff. And the officials of provinces are your subordinate bureaucrats. That would be like the mayor of Paris or the mayor of Henry County. He wanted all of them to be there. He brought all of them in for this giant statue of gold that he wants everybody to bow down for. But let's keep reading. In verses 4 through 6. Then the herald loudly proclaimed, "To you the command is given, you peoples, nations, and populations of all languages, that at the moment you hear the sound of the horn, flute, lyre, trigon, psaltery, bagpipe, and all kinds of musical instruments, you are to fall down and worship the golden statue that Nebuchadnezzar the king has set up. But whoever does not fall down and worship shall immediately be thrown into the middle of a furnace of blazing fire." So now we've got this group of instruments. And they make sure to mention this same group of instruments several times. Again, there's a reason for that we'll get into in a little bit. A horn is just a simple trumpet or cornet. What they call a flute would be like a metal recorder for us. If anybody had one in the 3rd or 4th grade, we always sounded horrible, but maybe you sounded better. A lyre is a small stringed instrument. A trigon is a triangular stringed instrument. It's a little bit bigger. The psaltery is a large stringed instrument, kind of like a harp. The bagpipe is not what you're thinking from Scotland. Sometimes it's called a dulcimer, but it was an instrument that was capable of producing multiple music notes at the same time. And then he said there's other musical instruments as well. So there's a lot of pageantry that's going along. Keep that in mind. That'll be important here in a minute. He built a statue that was 90 feet tall by 9 feet wide. Now, if you understand science, a 90-foot tall gold statue that's only 9 feet in length is 9 feet in width is not going to be real strong. So they said this was actually built on what they call a plinth, which is a raised stage that was probably about 50 feet high with the statue on top of it, but all of it built in wood and then overlaid in gold. He really goes out of his way for this. But see, Nebuchadnezzar's a smart king. There's a reason why he would go in and conquer a nation and take the best of their young men and women and put them in his court. He would take large groups of countries he had conquered and would move them around to other areas he would conquer. That way, all of it was Babylonia, not just the small area that he started with. Everywhere he conquered, he's trying to integrate people into being with each other. Thus comes the reason for this giant golden statue. He believes if he can get everybody into one religion, that again, it's going to solidify this country. The premise is a good idea. Nebuchadnezzar just thought, well, because I want this, I can make everybody do it. And he has a problem with this, as we see several times. We'll talk about that a little bit more here in a little bit as well. But he's thinking, I'm going to set this up. Everybody's going to listen to what I say. I'm not going to have to worry about it. If you don't, now remember on this, they said they're going to be immediately thrown into a fire. If they play the music, the people won't bow. So they play the music. All the peoples bow except for Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Then in verse 8 of chapter 3, it says certain Chaldeans. So there are some members of the wise men in his court that are jealous of the attention that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego are getting. And so when they refuse to bow, these guys are jealous. They go right to the king and say, hey, king, these guys, they're not doing what you asked them to do. So that leads us down to Daniel 3:14 and 15. It says, Nebuchadnezzar began speaking and said to them, is it true, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that you do not serve my gods, nor worship the golden statue that I have set up? Now, if you are ready, at the moment you hear the sound of the horn, flute, lyre, trigon, psaltery, and bagpipe, and all kinds of musical instruments, to fall down and worship the statue that I have made. Very well. But if you do not worship, you will immediately be thrown into the midst of a furnace of blazing fire. And what God is there who can rescue you from my hands? So now we start to understand Nebuchadnezzar a little bit better. And here's the thing, Nebuchadnezzar actually likes Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. How do we know that? Because he doesn't immediately throw them in a fire. He brings them in and says, now wait a minute, guys. If we play these instruments and you'll bow down, then very well. If you don't, you're going to force me to throw you into a furnace. Now remember, he's got all the officials from the land there. He can't afford to look weak. If he tells somebody he's got to throw him in the furnace, he's got to throw him in the furnace. If he doesn't, he loses credibility. And he's doing that in front of all the officials from his land. And then he says, what God is there who can rescue you from my hands? This is how much Nebuchadnezzar thinks of himself. In his mind, I said it. I'm the most powerful being on earth. There's not a thing in the world you can do to stop it. That's where he is in his mind. The funny part is, Nebuchadnezzar has already forgotten once about the power of God. In chapter 2, he has a dream. And he calls his wise men together and says, hey, tell me the meaning of this dream I had. And they said, okay, well, tell us what the dream is. He said, no. You're going to tell me what the dream was, and you're going to tell me what the solution is. And all the wise men said, nobody can do that. And he says, well, you're supposed to be wise men. If you can't do it, I'm going to kill all of you and get some new ones. And finally, Daniel steps forward. And Daniel talks to God. God gives him the dream. God gives him the solution. And in Daniel chapter 2, verse 47, Nebuchadnezzar says, your God is God of gods and Lord of kings. Now we're one chapter later, he's forgotten. He's forgotten what God had done with Daniel. Now some people have said, well, why isn't Daniel in with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego? And some people have even used that to say, well, we think he bowed down to the statue. I think the solution is much easier. In Daniel chapter 2, verse 48, it says, then the king promoted Daniel, and this is after the dream, and gave him many great gifts, and he made him ruler over the entire province of Babylon, and chief prefect over all the wise men of Babylon. So Nebuchadnezzar has all the other officials out on the plains of Dura, which is fairly close to Babylon, but not in the same space. somebody still has to rule the country. So guess who's back home at the palace? That would be Daniel. Daniel's back there running things. Nebuchadnezzar is busy trying to get his will done. But let's keep going with verses 16 through 18. The king has told them, you're going to bow down or I'm going to throw you in a furnace. So Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego replied to the king, Nebuchadnezzar, we are not in need of an answer to give you concerning this matter. Basically, we really don't have to answer your question here, but we're going to. It says, if it be so, our God, whom we serve, is able to rescue us from the furnace of blazing fire, and he will rescue us from your hand, O king. But even if he does not, let it be known to you, O king, that we are not going to serve your gods, nor worship the golden statue that you have set up. So they tell the king right out. The king said, and what God can protect you from me? And they say, our God can. But even if he doesn't, we are not going to bow to that statue. Now remember, Nebuchadnezzar is an egotistical man, and he's got all his government with him. And these three young men have just said, no. This is where it starts to get interesting. Because God could save them. And when he says God will save us from you, he doesn't necessarily mean that they'll live through the experience. God's going to take care of us no matter what happens to our bodies. If it comes in the after, it comes in the after. But they also show that sometimes you don't have to react loudly. That when you have quietly decided not to participate, that doesn't make you a weak person. A lot of people think, well, if you're quiet, you don't throw up a lot of fit, then you must not be very brave or you must not be very strong-willed. And that's simply not true, because quiet rebellion does not hide the heart of a coward. It just means that we don't have to prove anything to anybody else except for the one that can save us. A lot of times we decide to take a stand, but when things start getting difficult, we give in. We give up. We quit trying. And the three of these young men did not want to die. But obviously they're not afraid of it. They've just told the most powerful man in the nation that no, we are not going to bow to this idol that you've put so much time and effort into because you want to make your kingdom greater. They stand firm because they trust God. And they say, no matter what happens today, that is not going to change. And something interesting happens to Nebuchadnezzar. Then Nebuchadnezzar was filled with wrath, and his facial expression was changed toward Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. He answered by giving orders to heat the furnace 7 times more than it was usually heated. Here's the king whose pride unilaterally demands that everybody do exactly what he tells them to do. And these three have said no. And they've done it in front of all of his officials. They're making him look bad. I like the way the NIV says this about his facial expression. It says his attitude toward them changed. They had been favorites of Nebuchadnezzar. Then they refused to do what he asked. Now he is beyond angry. He is beyond furious. He says, heat the furnace 7 times more. That doesn't mean that they actually measured it. It means you heat that thing as hot as you can possibly get it. I don't care what you have to do. You put every amount of fuel in there. I want this thing burning hot. And then he has some soldiers grab these 3 young men, tie them up, and toss them in. It's so hot by this time, the soldiers that are throwing them in die because of this. Then the king looks into the fire and sees something different. Verses 24 and 25. Then Nebuchadnezzar the king was astounded and stood up quickly. He said to his counselors, "Was it not 3 men that we threw bound into the middle of the fire?" They replied to the king, "Absolutely, O king." He responded, "Look, I see 4 men untied and walking about in the middle of the fire unharmed. And the appearance of the 4th is like a son of the gods." So now, what does he do? That was his whole plan. His plan stopped when those boys went in there. What I wanted is done. I can walk away. But then all of a sudden he went, wait a minute. Wasn't it 3 that we threw in there? He knew it was 3. Everybody knew it was 3. But he's thinking, maybe I had a brain lapse here. It was 3. And they say, yes, sir, it was 3. And then Nebuchadnezzar finds out there is a God that can save these 3 young men from him. Verses 26 and 27. Then Nebuchadnezzar came near to the door of the furnace of blazing fire. He said, "Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, come out, you servants of the Most High God." Oh, all of a sudden they're servants of the Most High God. Interesting. "And come here." Then Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego came out of the middle of the fire. The satraps, the prefects, the governors, and the king's counselors gathered together and saw that the fire had no effect on the bodies of these men, nor was the hair on their heads singed, nor were their trousers damaged, nor had even the smell of fire touched them. Here's what makes that interesting. The Bible reports that they were bound before they threw them in, so the fire had effect, just not on these 3. And when they come out, they show no effect of the fire. There's nothing smoking. There's no odor of, they came out completely clean. Now Nebuchadnezzar understands there is a God. Or probably even better to say, he remembers that the same God that Daniel has also protects these 3 young men. And all of his officials have witnessed this. But on top of that, for the first time in his life, he has seen the proof of a God. The 4th person standing in that flame. Oh, he'd worshiped gods all his life, never seen one. Now, all of a sudden, here is the very proof that, boy, I was completely wrong. I mean, I was so mistaken, you can't get any further mistaken than what I've been. Now, you would think, again, with this king whose pride unilaterally demanded obedience, has suddenly thinking, okay, I have got to rethink everything. So this is number 2. In chapter 4, this is how long Nebuchadnezzar remembers, because in chapter 4, he forgets again and says, look at how great I am, and God sends him out for 7 years to live like a wild animal. Nebuchadnezzar was a hard one to get through his mind. You know, he kept thinking, I am the greatest thing that this land has ever seen. And he didn't like it when he found out that that wasn't the case. But he also knew now that God had the power to do whatever he wanted to Nebuchadnezzar. And so he finishes up in verses 29 through 30. Nebuchadnezzar said, "Therefore I make a decree that any people, nation, or population of any language that speaks anything offensive against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego shall be torn limb from limb and their houses made a rubbish heap, because there is no other God who is able to save in this way." Then the king made Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego prosperous in the province of Babylon. Ironically, this is the last that we hear of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. They end up with high positions in the government. But now Nebuchadnezzar's view has completely changed. And so what lessons do we draw from what these three young men went through? Well, the best thing is always to take what happens to them and try to understand how that fits in our lives. So what golden idols are out there that the world is asking you to bow to? What golden idols do you have to face? Or what is it that comes between you and God on a daily basis? This world offers money, it offers sex, unethical behavior, power, lack of compassion, theft, addiction. We could go on with what the world offers. But these three young men show us something. And that's the ability to maintain uncompromising integrity, no matter what you're facing. God has the ability to take you through whatever it is that you're dealing with. But sometimes He won't. And if He doesn't, we still have to say, we will follow you no matter what happens. If my death has to come about as part of that, I am still going to put my faith and hope in you. And what fiery furnaces do we face in our life? What can that be? Those who ridicule our beliefs, those who don't want us to share our faith, or even an embarrassment when we try to share our faith. Is it not following the very rules that we preach, saying one thing, doing another, not standing up for others when wrong is done, not helping those who are in need? What are the fiery furnaces? What is the punishment that we face in this world that God needs to save us from? Well, one thing we need to note is these three strengthened each other. We are stronger when we are together. Iron sharpens iron. We make each other stronger and lift each other up. That's what these three young men did. And fear is such a powerful motivator in life. I mean, and there's so many fears, it's beyond limits. We fear death, we fear failure, we fear the unknown, we fear ridicule, we fear loss, we fear that we're not enough, we fear that we'll never have enough, that we'll never be enough, that we never look the right way. There's so many fears that surround us. But God said, I am walking beside you. And when it comes to fear, Jesus said in Matthew chapter 10, do not be afraid of those who can kill the body. Be afraid of the one who can kill the body and the soul in hell. He says, this world will threaten you. This world may even kill you. But I'm still with you. And I will take care of you. Maybe not here, but somewhere. But here is my favorite part of this story. Now imagine this for a minute. Even though these young men weren't afraid of death, this still had to be a terrifying experience. They've watched the most powerful man in the world just order them to be tied up. They've watched the guards that were throwing him into the fire be killed. They're expecting that life is going to end. They're expecting that this is over. And what happens in the next instant? They are standing with a son of a God, an angel, a representative of the God who loves them and wants to protect them. They are in the sphere of His protection so much that you can't smell smoke on them. And think about that for just a minute. Because in the Old Testament, they did not have a spirit that went with them as we have today. We have a spirit that resides within us. When we show our belief, when we develop our faith, when we repent and confess and are baptized, we are given the gift of the Spirit. He walks with us each and every day. There's the famous poem about the footprints. I think there's a copy hanging right there in the room, where the man on the beach says, when life got hard, I only see one set of footprints. And he said, that's when I was carrying you through those times. He's still there. And what's the most important thing to know is that he is always going to be there. So whether it's fear, whether it's worry, whether it's frustration, whether it's watching somebody else hurting or dealing with sickness or dealing with death, God is still there. He can still protect us from whatever he decides to protect us from. And so know each day as you go through life that every step you make, he is right there with you. Can you learn how to recognize him when he is standing beside you? That's the big question that we have. May the Lord bless you and keep you. May the Lord make his face to shine upon you and be gracious to you. May the Lord lift his countenance upon you and give you peace. Let's all stand and sing.